Hello everyone, my name is Teri Lemanis and I'm an educational consultant for Hamilton House Publishers. And today I'm going to give you a presentation entitled Let's Talk About It. And it deals with developing the speaking skill in our students. So, I came across this meme recently and it actually inspired me to write this talk. So how many of your students do you think fall into this category? And how many of you yourselves feel this way about your own ability to speak in English? So then, why is there this imbalance? Why is this the case? Well, let's talk about why speaking can be difficult. Mainly because speaking requires multiple skills at the same time. And in normal situations, we don't talk to ourselves, but with another person. So, in order to speak, we must be able to listen to and understand what the other person is saying. Then, of course, we need to have adequate grammar and vocabulary knowledge to give an appropriate response. We also need correct pronunciation in order to be understood, as research suggests that pronunciation can account for up to 2/3 of communication breakdown between non-native speakers. And then, of course, there's the competences, which we will talk about in a moment. And above all this happens in real time, which makes it very challenging in comparison with the other productive skills. Another factor is that education systems in most countries aren't very conducive to language learning in general. Things like large classroom sizes, strict syllabus and curriculum adherence and other educational requirements, preparation for standardized tests, and, of course, limited class time makes it very difficult for us teachers to focus on speaking with all or most of our students. So even if you did study English in school, you probably had very little speaking time, and in real context for that matter. So, pronunciation. Depending on your L1, you might not have ever produced some of the sounds that exist in the English language. And even worse, you might not even know your pronunciation is wrong because your ear isn't trained to hear the subtle difference between your pronunciation and the correct one. Some examples that come to mind are words like beat and bit, or shave and save, cup and cap. Well, to overcome this, try focusing on a few of the most commonly mispronounced sounds in English, like the th sounds. Getting really good at these tricky sounds will boost your confidence and help you sound more fluent than you may be. It can also be helpful to practice with a native English speaker who is roughly at the same level in your language one. Since they will understand your struggles, they will likely be more patient with you. And of course, there's a variety of accents. Is it controversy or controversy? Yogurt or yogurts? One might argue that these slight mispronunciations or variations may not be that significant, but let's see what could happen in the worst case scenario.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Okay. Now, let's talk about grammar versus usage. Speaking requires a great deal of knowledge, a large part of this being, of course, vocabulary. Now, it's been said that fluent speakers know the meanings and pronunciations of at least 10,000 words and phrases. For comparison, the average US college student knows about 20,000 words. But while most realize that vocabulary and grammar are important, fewer are aware of an equally large body of facts called usage. Usage is not the same as grammar. Grammar consists of big general rules that apply to grammatical structures and important grammar words, such as prepositions, conjunctions, pronouns. So, for example, everybody, anybody, anyone, nobody, no one, these are all singular. So we would say everybody makes mistakes, not everybody make mistakes, right? So such general grammar rules constitute only a small percentage of usage. Most of usage is in fact thousands of little facts that apply only to a specific word or combination of words. Now, usage is a very general term that refers to using words, phrases, and grammatical structures in the right situations, and joining words together to form correct sentences. So this includes things like collocations. Okay, so for example, we say strong flavor, but severe pain. You wouldn't say strong pain. Or we say it's, the last hope, but not last decision. It's the final decision. It also includes register, formal versus informal. So, you would say, I hope something interesting happens today in class, not transpires in class, because transpire is formal. Or in this example, the discrepancy between the two reports did not appear to be a big deal. Well, that's informal. You wouldn't use that in that context. And furthermore, the fact that extremely means very much is a matter of vocabulary. The fact that you cannot say Sarah extremely likes pasta is actually a matter of usage. Usage also includes connotations, the emotional overtones of words. So you would ask someone, do you sell phone cards? Not, do you peddle phone cards? Because peddle is disapproving, has a negative connotation. You would say the room was small and simple, but not the room was little and simple, because little is emotionally charged. Usage also includes what words, phrases, and structures are used in particular situations, the appropriateness for particular situations. So you say, here, have a cookie, not here, eat a cookie. That would sound very strange. Or he has a toothache, not he has a heart attack. It's he is having a heart attack. What size is it, but not what weight is it. All of this is examples of English usage. Now let's talk about communicative competence, which is simply the ability to use language to communicate successfully. Now, all second language speakers, even at a pure beginner level, possess some sort of communicative competence. So, take the request, for example, of asking for someone's pen. The most basic linguistic form would simply be pen, while pointing at the pen, or maybe pen, miming, writing with a pen. Okay? Whereas grammatical competence is the knowledge of the grammatical elements of a language and the ability to use them in speech. So, once some grammatical competence begins to develop and more vocabulary is learned, then the utterance, pen, would most likely progress to something like, give me your pen, please. Now, while this sentence is grammatically correct, and the second language speaker has communicated effectively what they want, the problem is that the imperative is generally perceived as being even more impolite than swearing in English. But of course, this is not the same in all languages. Thus, pragmatic competence needs to be developed. Pragmatic competence, let's talk about this now. Pragmatic competence is the ability to use language appropriately in a particular social context. It is key to effective communication in a second language. While communicative competence and grammatical competence are explicitly taught and developed in the classroom, developing pragmatic competence is often overlooked. However, it's actually the skill that native speakers subconsciously use to define a non-native speaker as a successful communicator. So, pragmatic competence includes communicative and grammatical competence, but also considers the appropriateness of language, taking the socio-cultural variables into account. Therefore, a teaching approach which includes pragmatic competence is needed to complement our approach to developing communicative and grammatical competence. So, instead of the traditional presentation, practice, production approach for grammatical and communicative competence, illustration, interaction, induction has been suggested by McCarthy as an effective approach in developing pragmatic competence. It simply consists of using examples from real spoken language, interacting with them and analyzing them, before finally drawing general conclusions from the examples as to how language is used in a particular context. As English is a lingua franca, we must ensure our students have an awareness of socio-pragmatically appropriate language, in other words, pragmatic competence, as a complement to communicative and grammatical competence. This will lead to improved speaking skills and an enjoyable experience in an English-speaking environment, as well as an enhanced intercultural communication overall. Now let's talk about some typical issues that affect L2 learners' ability to speak fluently. One common thing that trips up L2 speakers is that they often resort to direct translations, which is referred to as language transfer, from their L1, which we all know often ends in disaster. Common examples of language transfer include, I have 38 years. In languages like French and Spanish, for example, to have is used to express age, as opposed to the verb to be in English. I have car. There are no articles in Russian and many Slavic languages as well as Japanese and Korean, to name a few. I need some informations. In Greek, information is a countable noun, as is vacation. Can I make a question? Again, in Greek and in Spanish as well, the verb to make is used with a question. Or you have right, instead of for you are right. Pragmalinguistic transfer occurs when learners use language one strategies to perform a linguistic function which is often significantly different in the language two. For example, close the door. The imperative is the most appropriate request-making strategy in lots of languages, such as Greek and Slavic. But in general, English is a very informal language with relatively low social distance between all interlocutors, regardless of one's position, power, or ranking. Socio-pragmatic transfer occurs when applying socio-cultural norms of L1 to L2. So, for example, referring to the teacher as Miss or Sir, or even the question, how much money do you make? So, in the first example, the use of titles is more commonplace in non-English speaking cultures, whereas in English speaking cultures, you can refer to the person in their first name usually. While in the second example, this situation would be perceived as somewhat offensive to a native English speaker, it would not be considered inappropriate in some other languages and cultures. Another issue is intonation and stress, which refers to how we say something rather than what we say. So, not using intonation in interrogative sentences. For example, intonation is not used in information questions in Spanish. So, what do you want to do, for example, would be ¿Qué quieres hacer? Rather than what do you want to do? Or understanding that emphasis of a word can change the meaning of an utterance. So, for example, if you say, what are you doing here? Versus, what are you doing here? Have different meaning. Understanding that intonation expresses emotion as much as by use of specific words. So, take for example, saying thank you to a toll booth attendant. You would say it very lifelessly, thank you. As opposed to saying thank you to the same toll booth attendant who might let you go without paying the fare or the full fare. You would be very thankful and you would probably say thank you differently. More like, thank you so much. Syllabic and word stress is also very important. While it may not hinder understanding, if there are too many mistakes, the listener may become impatient or confused, and this is not good for communication. Of course, sometimes it even changes the meaning of the intended word, for example, rebel or rebel. Another challenge is when learners haven't developed their sub-skills, which include avoiding repetition. Avoid repeating vocabulary. Use synonyms. Interesting, fascinating, intriguing, amazing. Paraphrase ideas instead of repeating them. I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what you mentioned. I agree with your ideas, what you're talking about. Conversation maintenance. I see. Right. Even nodding your head, agreeing with comments, making eye contact. Responding appropriately while listening. Okay, saying, so, what else? Okay. Turn-taking techniques. What do you think about this? Well, if I might add something here. Sorry to interrupt. But if I understand correctly, all of these fillers and conversation maintenance skills are very, very important. Politeness, saying, oh, I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you mean. I don't understand that word. Would you mind repeating that? Speaking more slowly. Or circumlocution, which is simply talking around unknown words using known language. So, for example, if you don't know the word chase, you can say the phrase to run after. Native speakers do this all the time when using their language one. So, for example, when they're talking about a complex technical subject, like when we describe a problem with a stove or car engine or plumbing, we may not know the exact name of the part in our L1, but we can still communicate it to a gas fitter, a mechanic, or a plumber, using known words. And of course, expounding on concepts and ideas is very important for speaking fluently. Shyness. This is a very big issue. Being timid and not just going for it will not help your ideas to get flowing at all. Nor will being afraid to make mistakes, which may cause misunderstanding. The interlocutor will understand you are not a native speaker, so a certain degree of mistakes, no matter how bad or offensive they can be, are generally acceptable. There's also the fear of sounding or feeling ridiculous for making strange sounds, right? So a lot of these sounds that we make in the language too is foreign to our bodies, to our mouths, so we feel silly doing it. But we need to overcome this fear. Also, learners often misunderstand fluency because they tend to think that it means the speed at which you can speak, right? But however, it's the ability to maintain a flow of proper language without unnecessary hesitations. For example, you can naturally make some pauses or stops between certain words or even sentences using fillers like native speakers do. And of course, identity. I've often come across students that they don't want to try to sound native. They want to use direct translations because they feel like they're giving up their own identity. If they might think they're trying to sound too much like an American or a British person if they try to sound too fluent. So to follow up, let's talk about some tips for developing speaking skills. Provide ample opportunities for speaking exercises in class wherever you can. And don't just focus on formal exercises. Do some conversations at the beginning of class or some speaking games that are fun, using authentic language. Prepare as much as possible before a conversation or before a speaking task. So if the topic is known, work on identifying and using subject-specific vocabulary and phrases. If not, practice a few emergency phrases. If the listener doesn't understand or needs the speaker to slow down, you can use these. Practice with a proficient English speaker who shares the same L1 as you. Focus on the most commonly mispronounced sounds, right? Listening to native speakers is one of the most effective ways to improve speaking, but also listening. So recording yourself and then listening back to it can help you identify areas for improvement. It can help you notice patterns in your speaking, for example, grammar mistakes or pronunciation issues. Practice and develop the speaking sub-skills that we mentioned. Find opportunities to speak outside of the class, in person, over the phone, video calls. Just speak more. Watch TV shows, movies, series for exposures to authentic speaking and language use. And as I mentioned before, record yourself so you can hear your strengths and your weaknesses. But most of all, relax and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Go for it. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Goodbye.